The question is that this House do now adjourn. Conor Burns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a pleasure to rise to speak in this adjournment debate this afternoon and to conclude the formal business of the House this week, in which the House gathered to pay tribute to His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh. I would like to add my own tributes to the Duke. The Duke held a popular misconception about the town that I represent of Bournemouth, which he demonstrated to me when, on one occasion in Buckingham Palace, where he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Bournemouth, sir." He said, "Bournemouth? Full of old people." And I said, "Indeed, sir, many of them a good deal younger than you." And he looked thunderous for about 3 seconds and then burst out laughing and called the Queen over to tell her that this was the exchange. I rise on a constituency interest, but also on a national interest. The title of this debate is "The Future of the English Language Sector." My constituency of Bournemouth West has a very high proportion of English language schools contained within it. It's one of the things that adds to the cultural, social diversity of the town that I have the privilege to serve. And it is, Madam Deputy Speaker, I rather sadly looked this up earlier, 3,948 days since I rose in this chamber to deliver my maiden speech in an adjournment debate on the subject of the future of the English language sector. And at the time we were trying to persuade the government to introduce an extended student visitor visa to allow those coming from beyond the nations with which we shared an alphabet to have longer to come, places like Japan and China and Korea, to learn the fundamentals of the alphabet before they could learn the language, which of course took a longer time. And I'm pleased to say that at that time we were in fact successful in persuading the government to go down that course. And in that debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, I tried to outline the importance of the English language sector to the UK, where I said the English language is one of our greatest assets. English is the language of world commerce, and if we shut off the ability of those schools to thrive, to welcome people to our shores, and to enable them to immerse themselves in our language, our culture, and our values, in time we will look back and realise that we made a very fundamental mistake. I'm pleased to say we didn't make that mistake, and despite various challenges, the sector has over the years thrived. The Prime Minister, when he was Foreign Secretary, used to boast of the statistic that if you look around the world, 1 in 7 of the kings, queens, presidents and prime ministers around the world had their education here in the United Kingdom. When I had the privilege of serving as Minister of State for International Trade, I had co-responsibility for the international education strategy alongside the Minister of State in the Department for Education, and we saw the vital importance of English in promoting Britain's interests commercially and politically and socially overseas.
The Right Honourable Gentleman.
Delighted to invite my honourable friend.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Right Honourable Gentleman is making a fantastic speech about the importance of the English language sector and indeed English language schools, and rightly so identifying the point about soft power. But can I also just ask him to reflect a little bit about the positive impact that it has on our own local constituencies by being able to welcome people, the impact that that has on our local economy. I, for example, in Totnes have 2 English language schools, one of which sadly hasn't made it through this crisis. But the first that has, I hope, will have a long and prosperous future. Does he agree that in securing their future, you can benefit both our soft power and our local community's interest by having them in place?
I'm very, very grateful to my honourable friend, who, as ever, demonstrates what a powerful champion he is for the community that he serves. And he's absolutely right. It's not just the direct employment that is provided by the schools in terms of the teaching staff and ancillary staff who support their work. It's the host families who welcome students into their home as part of the vital experience. One of the reasons that we'll come on to perhaps a little bit later, that the response to the sector to go online is not quite as compelling as it at first may seem, because part of the experience is actually coming to the UK, going on cultural visits to Stonehenge, to see Westminster Abbey and Parliament, Salisbury Cathedral, all the things that people do when they're here. And my honourable friend is very, very wise to point this out, that the spend of these visitors is much higher than traditional visitors in the time they're here, so the benefit to our local economies is enormous. And that's before we even consider the long-term, the slow burn benefit we get, as these people who have come here, studied here, immersed themselves in our language, our culture, our traditions, have been, perhaps not in recent years, inspired by our parliamentary democracy, return as champions for the United Kingdom in their home countries, and as they grow into positions of political and commercial leadership in their home countries, often that benefit is returned to the UK in terms of contracts awarded or supply chains enhanced. So it's very, very, very powerful indeed. The Minister, who I have the highest regard for, I noted in the Times yesterday that the brilliant sketchwriter Quentin Letts referred to the Minister coming to do a UQ earlier in the week, where he said so the Whips fielded their second string punch bag, a business minister. Well, I'm not going to punch my honourable friend, and I know my honourable friend understands this issue and understands this sector and is indeed sympathetic to the cause that I'm trying to advance on their behalf today. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to get into the business end of this problem that we currently face. Like many other sectors, they have been profoundly affected by the implications of the COVID crisis. And one of the things they need is financial support to survive, to be there in a position to reopen when the normal commercial travel is resumed and we can welcome students again to the United Kingdom to come and study. And they have been disappointed and I think perhaps even bemused to find in the guidance issued by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy in February 21, where under the Q&A section, question 4, are schools and education providers eligible to receive grants under the LRSG closed addendum, 5th of January onwards, and closed businesses lockdown payment schemes? And it says schools and education providers, including English language schools, tutoring services, private and state schools, are not mandated to close in the regulations and are not therefore eligible to receive a grant under these schemes. Now, of course, it's absolutely correct to say that the schools were not mandated to close, but the reality is that because of the number of the other very difficult decisions the government rightly had to take to protect the safety of our population, they have had to close because their customers have not been able to come to travel to the UK to enrol on those courses, and their businesses have been dramatically impacted. I will say a word about that in a moment. Now, what the department says, and I understand why they're saying it, says they're not eligible for the Restart grant, as this is funding for the businesses in the non-essential retail and hospitality, leisure, personal care and accommodation sectors. They were not mandated to close, and therefore they're not eligible for support from the mandatory grant scheme, but they are eligible for support through the discretionary funding available to local authorities. And in my own case, our own local council are doing their level best to get support to those businesses. Of course, it's not as generous as it would have been under the preceding scheme had they been brought under the auspices of that. And the business rates are, in fact, the largest single fixed cost, non-controllable cost that these businesses face. And it will bluntly make the difference between them surviving or going under. And we will look back, as I said 10 years ago, nearly 11 years ago, we will look back, I think, with regret if we see this sector go under for the want of a relatively modest element of support. Ministers these days, I suppose I was guilty of it as well, use the word investment as though it's synonymous with spending, and much of it is actually just spending. It's not investment. You get a return on an investment. This would be an investment because, as the reasons I've articulated, this sector is so vital to the UK. It's worth about 1.4 billion in value added, 35,000 jobs, part of the wider 20 billion in the international education sector. 91% of the employees in the sector have been either furloughed or sacked. Student numbers are down by 79% on 2019. The hopes of a longed-for summer recovery have been hit badly by the outbreak and renewed rising cases in some of the main countries that we attract students from. There are only 17 local authorities who are providing the relief to schools on the business rate relief, 17 local authorities across the whole UK. I think the ask of the sector is straightforward. It's can we extend and can we look to, and I'm not asking for a commitment obviously now from the Minister today, but could he undertake to go away and look at this and meet with perhaps with me and representatives of the sector to talk about what further support could be put in place to help and support the sector. Could we look to extend the business relates relief to language schools in the same way as we have for other leisure and hospitality businesses for the current financial year and indeed into the next financial year. We've already seen 13%, that's over 50 businesses, 50 educational centres closed during the pandemic, and that is a very serious and regrettable situation, but sadly one I predict that if we don't do something, will get worse in the coming months. Can we look to extend the list of the Travellers Scheme post-October 2021 so that third-party national school groups would not need visas to come to the United Kingdom? Could we perhaps look at extending again something that was offered up 11 years ago in return for the extended student visitor visa? Could we look at the return of limited rights to work for students who are in the UK? And that might, by the way, certainly in economies such as the one that I represent, and I see my honourable friend, the member for Mid Dorset and North Poole, on the Treasury bench, the hospitality sector that's very important to our particular part of the UK in Dorset. They are now struggling post-departure from the European Union by people having returned from this country to their home countries to find the staff to populate the hotels and restaurants as they prepare to reopen. This could be a very good way to give them some respite in that. Those are just some of the small things that we could look to do. And I sort of end with this point. I'm delighted to give away to my wonderful friend.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I apologise for having two bites of the cherry, as it were, but I also wonder whether or not the Right Honourable Gentleman would agree with me about whether or not we might try and make it easier for people to set up English language schools. Because, yes, we have lost some, and he has outlined that already, but actually being able to set up English language schools when normality does return would be a very strong way to fulfil all the points that he's made in his speech.
I absolutely agree with and endorse the sentiment that my honourable friend expresses. And I say in that, I was very struck when I travelled as a trade minister of meeting people with their very fond reflections of their time in the UK, people in Chile, in Brazil, even in Vietnam. And the great brand that we put some extra money into promoting the English language sector, and indeed other aspects of our educational provision. One massively untapped area of this, where the UK is a world leader, of course, is in special educational needs, something we could do an awful lot to share with other countries around the world. There's all sorts of other things that other countries, and we are not the only place that you can come to learn English. We might be the best, Madam Deputy Speaker, but we're not the only one. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States and Ireland are all competing for students in this market. There'll be lots of things that they are doing to make life easier for those seeking to come and study and learn in those countries, accessible visa applications, in-country visa extensions, part-time work rights that I've mentioned, and my long-term bugbear, which the Prime Minister very much shared, that we should remove international students from the net migration figures, because that sends a very negative message internationally and confuses our offer to the wider world. And I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, that is really all that I want to say on this subject today, because I want to leave plenty of time for the Minister to reply. But it's really saying to the Minister, would he undertake to have a look at this, to work with me and with the sector to see what we can do to support this incredibly powerful national asset that is so pivotal to our ambition to be global Britain.
Yeah.